Welcome, everyone, to Bring Out the Talent. My name is Maria Malfa, and I am the CEO and President of the Training Associates, otherwise known as TTA.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jocelyn Allen. I'm a talent recruitment manager here at TTA, and we're thrilled you're joining us again. Backed by popular demand, we have another co-host with us today.
And my name's John Lavager, Director of Learning Solutions. Thanks.
We're excited to have you join us again today, John.
Well, I'm excited to be here.
We are very excited to have our longtime TTA partner and remarkable learning strategist join us today, Mr. Jerry Gschwind. Jerry has over 25 years of experience in the learning and development industry, helping clients across a wide variety of industries, ranging from startups to Fortune 500 companies. Since 2008, Jerry has managed Symphony Learning Partners, a learning strategy consultancy dedicated to helping clients create and transform their most complex and strategic learning programs. Before starting Symphony, Jerry was Vice President of the Enterprise Solutions Business Unit of Global Knowledge, where his organization was responsible for the development and management of large-scale custom learning programs for corporate clients. Jerry has held many key training positions, including a consulting manager at Accenture for 7 years, where he assisted multinational corporations with complex learning challenges related to strategic technology and business process deployment. Jerry holds a bachelor degree from Duke University and a master's degree in learning sciences from Northwestern University. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jerry.
Thanks for having me.
Jerry, so excited to have you here today. Thanks for joining us on Bring Out the Talent. We obviously adore you here. We have a great relationship with you, have many successful opportunities that we've deployed with you.
Won some Brandon Gold Awards
and
with
a
Jerry.
Brandon Hall Award, too.
Yes.
Look at sliding that in there, too.
Yes.
Amazing. Obviously, you're very passionate about what you do. So could you tell us what led you to this industry and what made you so passionate about L&D?
Yeah, sure. You really have to be passionate about this industry. It's not an easy industry to work in for those of us that are in it. And, you know, it goes pretty far back for me. My earliest recollection of sort of the kindling wood on this thing was in 10th grade. I was asked to write a paper in math, right? There was we had to I don't know why we were writing a paper in math, but we had to. So I decided to write a paper. I don't think my math teacher liked this paper that much, but it was why students hate math. Because I started to think, really, nobody in my class really liked math. I kind of liked it because I was pretty good at it, but I could tell that no one really liked it. But I started to think about why people didn't like it. And I wrote this paper that basically suggested that we're teaching math the wrong way, that we shouldn't just teach people the rules of math. We should let students discover the rules of math, and that would be a lot more fun. Right. And realized later that I was sort of onto something there as a 10th grader. Then in college, I spent a lot of time working in a tutoring organization, working with local high school kids who were struggling. And I learned a lot about learning through that process, just hands-on. I could see where people would miss a simple thing and then you could help them fill in the gaps. For example, like teach somebody negative numbers and then they could do calculus, right? That was something it was just that aha moment when you're able to help someone learn something and that light bulb goes off in their head, it's just a remarkable feeling. So I just kind of carried that into my career. I started with Accenture as a computer programmer, but as soon as I discovered that there was a training division within Accenture that was small and growing quickly, I jumped on that. And then found an opportunity also within Accenture to earn my master's degree, through a corporate program that they sponsored. And that was, Learning Sciences, the Learning Sciences program at Northwestern, where I worked under Roger Schenck. And Roger Schenck, he's been very influential in my career. He's a big learning by doing guy. He's all about making instruction that's not boring, and making sure that people are motivated. And it was a great experience. So I think those were really the kind of key experiences that fueled my passion and kind of continued to fuel it from here on out.
After you left Accenture, were you clear on wanting to become a learning strategist? Was there something about your experience there that led you to where you are now?
I don't know. Learning strategist was something I arrived at a little bit later. At that stage in my career, I found myself either really needing to choose, whether or not I wanted to be a partner in a large consulting firm or whether or not I wanted to delve into learning. Right, regardless of the personal financial impact that would have on me. So I decided I'd go with my passion as opposed to my bank account, and did that. And I just wanted to stay in learning. I just wanted to work for companies that were completely focused on learning and training. that was pretty much it. And I started with, a really tiny company that I could ride my bike to in Charlotte called Vision Corps. And, we did some really interesting stuff there, and then worked for Productivity Point, a technology training company, and then another larger technology training company, Global Knowledge. And I just sort of followed my passion for learning and into a leadership role, Global Knowledge. Where there I started to see more clearly the strategic struggles that, companies would have with large scale learning programs, and found myself, in a lot more sort of senior level meetings with senior level learning leaders trying to grapple with these struggles.
Was that what hooked you? Was that problem solving, creative aspect of it?
I would say so. Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I really liked meeting with customers and talking about their problems with them. I even got grounded by my CEO.
Like legitimately, like go to your room?
Neglecting the operational aspects of the business I was running, overly trusting and being a little overly hands-off as a manager, because I, wanted to just be out on the road talking to customers and dealing with these problems. So my CEO, I think we had a weak quarter profit-wise, and I think my CEO said, "That's it, you're grounded." A little while, but yeah, so I think that illustrates that point really well. That's where I've gravitated to. So then when I went out into private practice, I sought out opportunities where I would be face to face with customers, helping with their problems. And then I think I sort of stumbled into and realized, hey, that's a career, right? That's something you can do. That's a learning consultant, or eventually kind of arrived at, I think I can call myself a learning strategist now. If I can sit down with customers, help them solve their strategic learning problems, I guess that's what that is. So it was a very evolutionary sort of process for me.
What made you decide to go on your own?
So the business unit I was running at Global Knowledge was the company decided to combine it with an existing business unit rather than run it as a standalone unit. The company at the time was their overall strategy was focused on the core business. This was leading into the recession. I think they sort of knew that was coming. Mm-hmm. had their feelers out, and they kind of understood that the rainstorm was coming. So they actually sold off some things and trimmed some things. And then my business unit was a bit experimental for Global Knowledge, to do custom solutions and to be out there doing whatever, not just technology training. So they just didn't have a need for that business unit anymore, nor a leader for that business unit. So I helped them combine that business unit and then moved on. And to really answer your question though, I thought, well, should I get another job, with another learning company? And I'd done this 3 times. And I thought, well, okay, you've seen this movie 3 times. You know how it starts. You know how it ends, right? And, Global Knowledge was a great place to work. I learned tons there, working with senior executives, working with our chief legal counsel on contracts. Learned a lot about contracts, So, I decided I felt like I'd learned enough at that point from others,
Certainly had a well-rounded background working with Accenture and Vision Corps and Global Knowledge and PPI.
Yeah. I felt like I'd learned enough at that point. I could figure the rest out. But I've always wanted, I could go back to 98, and I remember wanting to start my own business, right? Just didn't know what to do. And I'm like, Jerry, what more training or foundation do you really need? Why don't you just go ahead and set up an LLC and get going? Right. And so I decided I'd try it. I had great advice from somebody. He said, who sometimes people give you advice and you get stuck, there's no way to argue it. And it's this friend of mine who's very entrepreneurial. He started a sub business when he was in college. I mean, he's a very entrepreneurial guy. Got his MBA, really, really good guy. He advised me, he said, if you never do this, you will regret it for the rest of your life. Dang, I can't really argue with that one. I better at least try this for a year. Shut it down, right? But I've been doing it for 13 years now, so it's worked out.
It's fantastic.
So Jerry, I've spoken to countless clients, and in discussing learning strategy with so many of them, it's become clear that they all have their own definition of learning strategy, or it means different things to different people. So I'd be really curious, how would you define learning strategy?
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess at the highest level, I would say learning strategy is helping people figure out what to do about their learning, before they do it. Because that's to me the crux of it. The chief pitfall I feel like a lot of learning organizations fall into is that without thinking through what they're doing and why they're doing it, they jump in and they start designing courses, or they start putting curricula together because they're under pressure, they're under deadline pressure, they're under financial pressure, and they just got to get it done, right? And the business is screaming at them, and they don't have enough people, and all those usual issues. So what I feel like learning strategy tries to do as a discipline is to get people to stop and take a breath and just think about what they're going to do before they do it, so that they avoid problems, so they do things that are optimal, efficient, effective, and so they do things that are aligned with their company's strategy, as opposed to, going off the rails. But there are, you point out, I think there are a lot of different ideas about what learning strategy is. And I think that's because there are a number of different flavors of learning strategy. Two big ones, I would say, are like operational strategy. So people that will go into a really large company and help them reorient how they operate around learning. So they'll take like a learning organization that might have like 300 people in it or more, and help them look at the organization, look at the processes, look at how they develop courses, maintain courses, deliver courses, measure them, all of those things. And then there's strategy that's really focused on strategic program effectiveness. And I'd say that's a little bit more my focus. That's kind of where I spend most of my time. I do both, but that's where I spend most of my time, is helping people really think about how to make a big or really important program, even if it's not big, effective, right? And I would say there's also little offshoots from that, little sort of niche strategic flavors like technical infrastructure. So learning technology strategy. There's a lot to know about learning technology, right? So unfortunately for all of us who are trying to keep up with it, there are lots of different tools, and within each tool set, there's, sometimes like just take the LMS market, for example, like learning management systems. Last I checked, there were something like 500 or 600 legitimate companies in that space. It's almost impossible to do a selection, in a space like that, right? It's really difficult. So there's people obviously that, will specialize in those niche areas of learning technology. And that I think is an important flavor. And people that focus on things like measurement, right? There are experts out there that just focus on measurement. Another important and somewhat complex niche flavor of strategy. So yeah, I think there is some confusion because there's all these different aspects and dimensions to learning. But if you put them all together, overall, I'd say the big idea is helping clients make sure that they know what they're doing. They're like self-aware of what their plan is for learning, and that it's got a good chance of success.
Jerry, do you see overlapping between a learning strategist and a organizational development consultant?
Yeah, I think there's a little overlap. I would say mostly on the operational side of things, right? So if you're a learning strategist like myself, who has experience running a business unit that's focused on delivering learning solutions, I would argue you have some pretty good ideas for how you might want to organize yourselves, even in a more internal sort of corporate industry setting, and could work really effectively with an OD professional who might have deeper expertise in how to put teams together, how to incent those teams, how to, compensation levels for those teams, and, and then other talent development professionals who might have expertise in, hiring and recruiting and retaining people. So like actually all those specialties working together, I think can produce really effective results.
What would you say you've mentioned some of them, of course, but what are the core benefits of developing a learning strategy instead of, as you also mentioned, just kind of going into it and thinking, all right, I'm going to start tackling this now?
Yeah, well, the idea of please don't just start tackling, right, comes from seeing and being involved in so many initiatives where I'm brought in late. I sometimes feel like that character in the movie Pulp Fiction, who they call in the middle of the night, and he's somehow mysteriously like in tuxedo or something. That means he's the wolf, right? They call him to clean up the body back of the car, and then you feel that way, sometimes because, and the client will even say, like, we know this is terrible, but we've got to fix this thing, and you wish you'd been there at the beginning, and so that's kind of the refrain. Like, I wish I'd been here earlier. I wish I'd been here earlier. It's something that for me is very motivating as a strategist to have the opportunity to be involved with a client at an early stage, whether they know or not, right? Knowing that you're helping them avoid pitfalls, right? Because you've seen so many of them. And sometimes they're well aware. Like when you say, well, if you do this, it could lead to this pitfall. And, what's really rewarding as a strategist is that sense of gratitude the client has for that idea. Like that is, wow, I never would have thought of that. And that would be a horrendous mess. Thank you. So avoiding pitfalls that are based on your experience of either falling into them or seeing others fall into them is certainly a huge benefit. I think there's real hard financial benefits to using a learning strategist. I think a learning strategist, and I would say, myself, but, many or most will probably help you, apply the 80-20 rule a little bit better than you can, meaning help you focus your energy on the things that are going to get you the biggest bang for your buck. Whether that be content, right? And helping point out to you that certain sections of a content library may not, get any uptake. Maybe you shouldn't be so optimistic that you'll get adoption, and maybe you should cut certain things from your offering. Whether it be that or whether it be just ideas for doing things more efficiently to help you avoid rework. So I think there's hard financial benefits as well. And then another one is something you hear if anybody that goes to a learning conference where learning leaders will speak, you'll hear at least one of them, if not all of them, talk about the alignment of learning strategy with business strategy and how important that is. I don't know that it's the easiest thing to do. I think part of it's common sense, but I think it's a challenging thing to do. And I think a learning strategist can really help you do that, because a learning strategist with an outside perspective can kind of hear your thoughts around how to do that and can kind of help you refine that and line that up a little better.
Yes, right on. We do hear that topic all the time.
Yeah.
Do you find that that's most often how you are brought in and what you're looking at, even if the client hasn't necessarily defined it as this, that there's a complete separation between learning strategy and their business strategy? They're just not connecting, and you're coming in to align those things?
I don't know the problems are as well understood as that. That would be good if a client was aware of that gap and really had it sort of nailed down.
I'm available for consulting.
Yeah, no. But we get there usually, and it will define problems, and maybe people, clients are even thinking about things in a way that I wouldn't think about them. Right. So a client might approach me and say, "We need a new learning management system. Ours isn't working." Right. That's a typical problem that I'll get sort of thrown at me. Right. And I'll say, I'll sort of go through the 5 whys on that, and we'll end up with no one's using it because it's difficult to use. What's in it though? Like what's in your learning management? What are you doing with your learning management system? Usually you find that content that's being delivered or the programs that are being delivered through it are suboptimal or not, like you just said, not aligned with, with the business needs. Right. And then, what I try to do in those cases, and I think that's just one example, I think is help clients take a couple steps back on what they think the problem might be and try to maybe see, either what the real root cause is or what the bigger picture problem might be.
And Jocelyn, just to piggyback on what Jerry said, over the years working with clients and as our internal consultants, continue to work with clients and become more seasoned, we start to pick up on cues pretty early in our discussions with them. Mm-hmm. So sometimes there's some hesitance on the client's part, or you can tell they're taking a very tactical approach to this, yet it's something that's very high stakes. And a lot of time we're bringing up the concept of, it might make sense to at least do an initial consult with a strategist and let's make sure the path we're taking here is the most effective and efficient possible. That's how we initiate a lot of the learning strategy sessions, and usually they're quite grateful for that once they see the results.
And you're our guy, Jerry Gschwind. You are.
I'm ready for those consults. Right. Yeah, and the other, John, you made me think too that what you often will see in a strategy engagement is it'll take a turn, right? So you think we're going to look at this problem. We're going to analyze, problem X. Problem X might be something around employee engagement, right? And maybe the people don't like the training, right? And we analyze that problem and assess that problem, provide recommendations around the problem. But then when we get into it, we realize that the reason that people don't like training has something actually to do with manager performance. And we have like a whole new thing to tackle at that point. And then we might take a turn, and that engagement, we might direct the resources or the budget for that strategy engagement at looking at that problem, having discovered it. So I guess as a strategist, what I try to do is be sort of flexible and nimble and not sort of have my eyes and ears wide open, knowing that it might, sort of take a turn, and that might be really valuable for the client.
What are some of the typical deliverables that result from learning strategy?
So the deliverables that I typically work on in a strategy engagement include program assessments. And that sort of gets into like two flavors of engagements that I find most common. One is, here's a program we're having trouble with, an existing program we're having problems with, it's broken or it's suboptimal in some way. Sometimes it's not 100% clear what's going wrong with it. So I'll help a client do a deep dive assessment on that particular program, looking at kind of everything, looking at how it's delivered, looking at the learning objectives, looking at how the learning objectives are applied in the course materials, looking over evaluation results, talking to people who've been through the program, talking to people who deliver the program, just exhaustively trying to figure out what the big problems might be. And the reason you do that is so you don't overfix it, quite frankly. Make sure that you identify what you could do, all the things you could do to improve that program, and then help the client prioritize, because some of these programs are giant. You have like 800 courses or something within a curriculum. You don't want to just overhaul the whole thing, for several million. You want to sort of cherry pick or sniper fire the things that will get you the most value. So an assessment's one key deliverable. Another one's a high level program design. So sometimes I work with clients who really are just starting at the very, very, very beginning. And they say, I've got an audience. I know they need education, but I have no idea how to do that. It may be an internal audience. It may be an external audience. It may be a company trying to educate their customers. It might be a university trying to educate students. And so I'll help them just kind of think through the basics of that program. So what are the major learning goals of that program? How would that program be delivered? What would be just at a very high level, the blend of modalities about it? Another key deliverable is a learning experience design. This is something I do quite often. So for a client who maybe has been through the first two deliverables that I mentioned, or not, either way, or they have some good ideas about what they want their program to be, a learning experience design helps provide the organization with a really clear vision of their program from end to end, from the point that a learner finds out about learning and engages and signs up and registers to the point that they've completed and or are progressing to advanced levels or are becoming experts themselves and recycling back into the program as facilitators. So to make sure that the organization is kind of on board with, this is what this strategic program is going to look and feel like to learners. And then finally, I work on implementation planning. So like given, again, those other three deliverables, a typical client will want to know, okay, great, that sounds great. Now, how do we build that? What resources do we need? How long it will take? What infrastructure are you going to need to put in place or change? What are the costs associated with all those things? What are the alternative models? And what are the respective cost differences between those models? So all of that analysis goes into an implementation plan.
I can't imagine not having a learning strategist involved in a project, especially at a large scope.
Me neither.
No, I mean, obviously clients might look at it and say, I don't want to spend that money, but
right.
In the end, it's going to cost less money because they're going to be able to have a strategic plan and do it correctly.
Right.
Don't go it alone.
Yes.
Exactly. Bounce back along the way.
Do you believe some of the very large organizations do have this capability in-house?
I do. Yeah, absolutely. I think large companies do a really good job of finding top-level talent, people with skill sets similar to me. And having been a vice president of a business unit in a learning organization, I kind of have a firsthand sense of what I think happens. But I also have, through observation of various people in various client organizations who are in that role and have the ability to be strategic consultants, I see it, sort of what happens from that angle as well. And I think individuals with that capability are taxed by their organizations to be leaders of people, right? Which is a good thing for them to do, but it also takes time away from their ability to be a strategy consultant. So while they have terrific ideas about how the organization ought to function and how some of the programs they're delivering ought to work, their time is so limited because of all the the people aspect of their roles. I also think that depending on the background and the experience of those individuals, their perspective can be limited. Like a typical career track might be, you work in 3 big companies, and then your third big company is, you're a chief learning officer. Well, you've worked in 3 big companies, and you've seen a lot, and certainly you have that perspective of what it takes to operate at scale in a large company. But at any given time, I'm working with like 14 or 15 different companies, trade associations, universities, startups, so I get a lot more reps, to use like a football term, right?
Yes, and all different industries.
I run a lot more plays than someone who's inside an organization and goes to work at the same place every day. And not at the same level of depth, right? I'm not seeing that story end to end, but I'm running a lot of plays. And so I think that experience complements can be very helpful to like a senior learning leader that's got all this other stuff to focus on and really doesn't have the time to get into the detail necessary around a learning strategy. And so like together, I think I've seen that work really well, can produce great results.
This is a really great segue into a little bit more about Symphony Learning Partners. Can you tell us more about your capabilities and more about your team?
Sure, yeah. This is also a bit of an evolution because when I started Symphony Learning Partners, like I knew I wanted to run a learning business, but I wasn't laser focused on learning strategy, 13 years ago. I really just want to solve clients' problems, right? And however I could do that, I wanted to do that. And a very common problem I found at the time, and still is a common problem, is helping clients use online learning and learning technology to make to transform their programs or to create programs that can be delivered at scale. And content development was always a large part of that. So instructional design and content development was a big part of, and still is a big part of what Symphony Learning Partners does. Then I realized what my capabilities were sort of as a learning strategist kind of early on. And I decided, okay, so this is a business that's going to do 2 things. It's going to help clients with their strategic decisions around learning, and it's going to help them execute those decisions. And I thought, well, that's a pretty good idea because then, that puts me in a position as a consultant where I'm never going to recommend anything to you that I can't actually do. And it helps keep me honest. It helps keep me in the details. And I think it just makes for higher quality recommendations because I can see and feel a lot more of what will happen if you execute a certain recommendation. And I'm prepared to stand, with you and support you in your journey all along the way. And so those other capabilities include instructional design, e-learning content development. We even get involved in program management and implementation. We also manage programs on an ongoing basis and even learning management system operations on a small scale. So we try to serve clients sort of end to end after the strategy through the execution phase.
Jerry, what would you say differentiates your team from other learning solution teams?
I would say that this kind of goes back to why I started the business. And one of the big reasons was I was very interested in solving specific client problems. So I was not interested in building a learning product and marketing that learning product. I was not interested in creating some sort of off-the-shelf solution that was scalable. I really was interested in meeting with people, hearing what their problems were and trying to fix them, like a doctor, right? That to me was appealing. In fact, I wanted to be a doctor when I first went to college, but I didn't want to, deal with, blood and chemistry and stuff like that. So, but that mentality of wanting to solve problems for people, I attract people into Symphony that have that same mentality, and the people that work that way are the people I enjoy working with, and they enjoy working with me. And so we sort of naturally have formed a network. And so I feel like we approach every client as a unique problem. We are very curious about not just the training, right, per se, but also like what's going on in the business and the organization, because that often gives us some clues about how the training should be on whether it be the strategy or the implementation side. So our curiosity and the level of specificity that we put around the solutions for our clients. If you look across our portfolio, you notice, everything looks a little different. There are some similarities, but there's lots of variety in the work that we do. And I think that's because that attention to the client's business needs, the client's learning needs, and all those specifics are in the forefront. And I've heard that from our clients. I've heard clients say, things like, your people like understand our business better than we do. or even Jerry, I think you could run this business unit now because of everything you've learned about this, right? That's one of the compliments we're always looking for.
I was just going to say, that's got to be the best kind of compliment that you can receive after all is said and done.
Yeah, it's great to hear.
Who do you typically work with at the organizations? Is there any particular titles?
Yeah, it's a great question. It really varies. Sometimes it's a learning leader, right? Sometimes it's a talent development person or a person who's like sort of senior in L&D. And oftentimes that's a very collaborative project where I'm working with that person who has a lot of their own great ideas and wants help thinking through those ideas, fleshing those ideas out, substantiating those ideas with industry best practices and some research and some assessments of their own, what's going on in the organization, and just doesn't have the time to do all that. So I'd say that's one type of person. And then another just general type of person would be someone who's more like in the business, right? So a sales leader, for example, or someone in health and safety, right? Or, the president of a small company who doesn't have a learning function. But now I've suddenly discovered, man, I need some learning. I don't even know where to begin. Let me put that together. How can I put that together? So that's a person who I find really fun to work with for different reasons. They're usually like really smart people that know nothing about learning. So it's fun for me to teach them kind of the basics, and they usually catch on really quickly. And so like I get the kind of the added benefit of helping them solve a problem and educating them personally. As a strategist, that's very rewarding.
Do you ever run into situations where you're working with one group in the organization and they're very open and accommodating and giving you a lot of information, visibility into the team, and then they bring in another group and they're more challenging?
Yeah, or just they're challenging without the former easy part, right?
Sure.
Yeah, I will never forget an engagement. I was asked to help this learning leader help their team understand gaps that he was seeing in their work and how the effectiveness of the product and the process that they were going through to produce training. And in this case, it was for a certified repair network, right? So it was external training, and this internal organization was producing that training for the external world, and it just wasn't getting very good reviews. And he was trying to communicate this to his team, but he didn't feel like the message was getting across. He wanted to bring in an expert to come in and help sort of give his criticism some validity. And I just didn't know what I was getting into. And I showed up on site, and they didn't have a conference room. Maybe that was deliberate. So we did a WebEx meeting after I flew long distance and more than one time zone.
Gosh.
And then, and I never actually met face to face with most of the organization. And then they were, very resistant to hearing any criticism. And every observation, there was an excuse. And frankly, we didn't get very far. Yes. I think what I took away from that was, ask a few more questions about the political landscape you're getting involved with when you're in that sort of engagement. And I'm not sure there was anything we could have done to sort of soften the blow or do anything differently there, given that was the objective that the client had. But it was certainly a lesson learned in that department.
There's often time constraints that we're trying to work around and deal with. Can you shed some light on some of the higher level timelines, for putting together learning solutions?
Yeah, it can really vary. So one of the questions I always ask at the beginning of an engagement, what are the business drivers for this particular engagement? Whether that be a strategy engagement or a program implementation engagement or a operational refinement engagement. Sometimes there are some very hard business drivers, right? Like we have a group of 300 new hires coming in, beginning every month, beginning September 1, right? So everything needs to be ready by September 1. Those new hires are coming in. They're going to be here, right? So we're going to run with whatever we got on September 1st. So that program has to be up and running by that, right? And then you have to manage everything to schedule. In other cases, the timelines are a little bit wider open. So I'm working right now. I'm in the midst of a strategic interview skills training course for a company that's growing rapidly. And from the get-go, their whole attitude on this project was, we want to get this right, even if it takes a while. So I think this project is a single large course, but it will have a 1-year anniversary before it's launched, because we're going through another phase of revision that involves diversity and inclusion. And they've also changed their branding along the way. So we're doing some changes there. And they're very comfortable with that long time frame in that particular case. So I guess we approach things based on what's going on in the client's business, and we manage accordingly. So we manage to schedule, or we manage to quality, or we manage to scope, depending on what's going on. Typically speaking, if you sort of average everything out, strategy engagements, the strategy piece is typically compact. So that will run typically maximum a couple months, but more often, 6 to 8 weeks, I would say, in that time frame. And that usually is driven largely by the amount of time that it takes to get certain people's availability for interviews or for review, right? Program implementation projects, they can last 6 months, depending on the complexity of the program. I'd say for a large scale program, that's somewhat typical. A single course, however, we will knock out in, a month or two, depending on its complexity. And we have needs that come through that are extraordinary in terms of time frame. So I got a call once from a client who said, "Hey, I need an e-learning course." I said, that's okay. We can do that for you. It was an existing client. So that's what we do. We can create an e-learning course for you. Like, the problem is it's tight time frame. I said, no problem. We are good at meeting tight time frames. Like, okay, great. This is at 3:00 Eastern time. Said, I need it by today. And I'm like, well, today in my world might be 2 hours from now, depending on what you mean by today. This is a West Coast client. So he said, well, by end of day, my time. So I'm like, great, I got 5 hours. Do you have the content? He's like, yes, I have the content. I'm like, all right, now we're talking. And we got that course produced in 5 hours. It was simple. It wasn't very interactive, but it did get the information out there, and we got it in their learning management system by the deadline. So, it's sort of, every client, once again, every client is different. The business drivers are all different, and we try to meet those needs.
Jerry, one situation that seems to come up quite a bit, and it kind of ties with the time constraints and getting things done quickly. I'll hear from learning leaders, we need to get something launched ASAP. But at the same time, we're very interested in being thoughtful and taking a more strategic planned approach to this. How do you typically work with those clients that have this immediate deliverable need, but also want to be methodical?
That's a great question. So that does come up. What we try to do is run things in parallel and viciously prioritize. So if we can identify things that are known or certain or sort of, good chance of success without a lot of premeditated thinking, we sort of can get those pieces into the design development pipeline, while at the same time, we were thinking through some things on the strategic end. And then if we need to influence those things midstream, we will. But then we generally try to phase work so that the things that are perhaps more complex and more difficult to define are delivered later in the project lifecycle. So it's some of that's just sort of project management, right? Trying to sequence work in a way that gives you the time to do a strategy while you're knocking out easy stuff. And then another technique is to think about your learning program like people think about software, and think, well, I need to get version 1 out, and there's nothing I can do about it. And I just don't have time to be strategic about it, but I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then you really think about it like version 1. So you don't invest everything in it, right? You invest just what you need to get version 1 done. And then either in parallel or after, you start your strategy. And then that strategy will be directed at version 2. But if you have that mentality, that can really help, right? Because then you're conserving resources. You're not burning them all on version 1, and then you got nothing left over. Because then what will happen is I'll get that call, I usually do, a year later to fix the broken learning program. And that's what you want to try to avoid, regardless of your time constraints, regardless of your budget.
So Jerry, it would be great to walk through one of these projects that you've done end to end, strategy, design, development. And I know one of those clients is Unum. And I was hoping you could walk us through what that was like. And I know that was actually an award-winning program, the Brandon Hall Excellence Award in Leadership Development. So it'd be great to understand how you approach that.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was such a fun engagement. Like you said, it was end to end. And it's so rewarding as a strategist to be able to help put strategy in motion, and then also be involved in the implementation, the execution of that strategy, and also to sort of be around and see the results, and it's always very satisfying. So I was able to experience all three of those phases with Unum, and with Kim Bolton, who was just terrific to work with at Unum. We started with designing the learning experience for their first formal frontline manager program. So Unum knew that they had some strategic challenges ahead from the business perspective. They knew that their business was changing rapidly, like the demands of their customers were changing. And they had already set in motion a strategy of transforming the company to an agile workforce, to an agile work environment, to an agile mindset even. So this plus other things going on in the business really drove first the definition of the core competencies we were going to focus on in this leadership program. So what impressed me about working with Unum and what I was able to help them think through was those competencies that would give them the most value given their strategic priorities. So for example, change leadership was going to be huge given the amount of change that the company was anticipating going through. So that ended up being one of the pillars of the program. And then we worked together to design a learning experience. And this was challenging because the Unum has a large group of managers. They have about 1,000 managers. So this could not be an experience that was reliant on traditional, straightforward classroom training. It needed to be driven, online, and there needed to be a lot of peer-to-peer evaluation and activity, and it could not have a giant facilitation burden. Otherwise, the program wouldn't be executable given the large size of the audience. So we designed a cohort-driven social experience that was mediated through a learning experience platform. A simple way I can describe that is a more social version of an LMS, where people go through the experience step by step, week by week together and discuss and work together. But the whole experience is mediated through online discussion and other online resources. And so when we were finished with the learning experience, it was funny. I thought that might be the end of the engagement. I never want it to be the end, but I just had a feeling that, well, this is a big insurance company. They got a whole bunch of people that can knock this stuff out. Turned out those people were busy. So Kim said, hey, so let's do this now, or something like that. I said, okay, so what team should we pull together? And she's like, I was thinking it would be you and me. And I thought, oh, well, okay, that makes sense. So as I thought more about it, and so we formed a 2-person team and rolled up our sleeves, and we began to curate content from the public space. We began to curate content from inside of Unum. And we each took a competency pillar, or we each took 2 competency pillars. So we divided and conquered most literally. And we, designed activities and worked collaboratively and built the program, as a very nimble 2-person team with a little bit of help from some others, but we were lean and mean by definition. And over, I want to say about a 4-6 month period, we had the first version of this program up and running and launched. And got great results in our pilot, got great results going forward. We got really, really high adoption rates. It's not a mandatory program, but we got hundreds of managers signing up every quarter. And over 80%, I believe, of managers reporting that they were applying the skills that they learned from the program, which is what we were looking for. And it was very satisfying. I also had the opportunity to meet with managers and focus group interviews like a year after and kind of hear their lessons learned from the program and what they were getting out of it. And it was, again, very satisfying. We were learning, for example, that this program helped form strong connections, networking connections between managers. We also found that the program helped managers and their supervisors form good relationships around the material in the program. So there was a lot of discussion and sharing of what people were learning and doing in one-on-one meetings. And that was another, great positive byproduct of the program. And I think deservingly, as a result, won the Brandon Hall Award.
That's an incredible story, Jerry.
Jerry, I remember when you came to visit us a few years ago and you talked to me about some of the work you were doing with Duke University, which was fascinating. Can you tell our audience a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. It is fascinating. It's even, I'd say, more fascinating given what's happening in academia on the heels of COVID. To take a step back, what we were initially engaged to do with Duke is to help them conceive of a brand new certificate program out of their biostatistics department. And the reason for this certificate program was there is a huge need for clinical research expertise in China and other developing countries. When you are doing clinical research, one of the trickiest things about it is acquiring patients with conditions that you can study. So developing countries not only present a lower cost of acquisition for a clinical research subject, but countries like China, they'll have like 100 people with a rare disease that we can only find like 2 people in the US, right? So there's a huge interest among Chinese physicians and Chinese hospitals to learn these critical skills that can help us all, right? And if everybody's doing research, then we all as a planet, I think, have a better chance of discovering medication that can help us all. And Duke has a special relationship with China, given actually has campus in China at Kunshan. They actually have a local presence there. So the established hospital in Beijing called Beijing Friendship Hospital, one of the earliest modern hospitals ever built in China, a large hospital in the center of Beijing, has some relationships and ties with some of the professors in the biostatistics department. And so we decided to create this certificate program for that population in Beijing. And it was a combination of, when we first, put a whole sort of strategy around it in terms of what would the blend of learning be, what would the economic model be. So we did a little bit of help with the finances around it as well, kind of considering different alternative models of delivery and development and all of that. And we landed on a blended model that involved creating a large library of statistics content featuring Duke professors, and a series of webinars that would help begin the process of physicians working collaboratively and thinking through how to design a research study. And then a live 7-day workshop where the physicians in Beijing would work with Duke faculty who fly over there and actually go through the hands-on process of designing a research study and then presenting that study at the end of the workshop. It was a hugely successful pilot as a result, and we were asked to continue the program for a 5-year time frame and doing 2 cohorts a year. So that was, that's sort of the program in a nutshell. We're seeing interest in the material and the program in other institutions in China, but also in other institutions in developing countries around the world. So now we're in the process of thinking through what are different learning paths, different ways to package this program up and deliver this program, sometimes with facilitation, sometimes with limited facilitation, and to try to serve this need and basically help improve these skills that are critical for all of us in these countries where research, more research could be happening.
That is amazing.
It's unreal, right?
Is.
Just yet another industry that you've put your hands into, Jerry. That's such a cool experience.
It's also a Brandon Hall award-winning program.
Look at you.
For it. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Amazing.
Wonderful.
You're like a James Beard award-winning chef of learning strategy. I'm
going to
call you Gordon Ramsay Geschwind from now on.
That's absolutely fantastic.
As we're wrapping up here, Jerry, I kind of want to give some perspective to our audience who's thinking about everything that we're saying and still kind of deciding, am I that organization that needs a learning strategist? So if you were to think of, I'm imagining, those lists that you get online that it's like, if you check off more than one of these boxes, you might be this person. So if you could give a list of maybe 3 boxes that if you check off one of these boxes, you definitely need a learning strategist, what would those 3 things be? Or maybe if you have less, if you have more, what are those identifiers?
Well, as I think about clients I've worked with and like the experience of meeting them and hearing why they are interested in speaking with me and what their problems are, a couple of things come to mind. One is, learning leaders who have a huge challenge in front of them, like a program that's not working, right? Or a new program they need to launch, they can't seem to find the time to pull it together. And the answers that they're getting from their people make them uneasy. There's just something about it. And it may be something that you can't put your finger on. But when you say to your team, hey, we need to do this, I want to have a plan, the plan you get doesn't make you don't feel good about it. For sure. It's something about that plan that you can't put your finger on it, but you feel like maybe it wasn't thought through. Maybe it's a knee-jerk reaction. Maybe it's just something you did before. Right. And so that could be a good point to bring in a learning strategist to think that through a little bit more. Speaking of something I did before, if you're having trouble thinking of something that's not something you did before, right? I think that's another good reason to bring. Because a learning strategist, myself or anyone like us that, has experience working with lots and lots of organizations can bring different ideas to you. Some bad, some good, but they'll be different for sure.
Right.
There'll be things you probably haven't thought of. We were talking in this podcast about my experience working with universities. So I'm so grateful that I've had that experience. I can still, I think, be a pretty good strategist and have no experience working with universities, but having the long-term relationship with a major research university and working with faculty and working with the challenges that they face, which is a little bit different than the corporate space, how they handle those challenges, which is also different than the corporate space, sort of gives us a fuel for ideas that can be really innovative. And I find that I bring a lot of corporate ideas into Duke, and I'm finding now that I'm similarly bringing a lot of sort of some of the things that we come up with on the university side into the corporate space. So the cross-pollination can be really good. I'd say the other piece that I hear, when it comes to how do I know if I need a learning strategist, is if you just feel overwhelmed or lost. Like I see this more with people who are outside of L&D, right? So they're in a functional role. I often will meet with people who have been sort of handed training, right? They're like a operational functional lead. And, they just either come to the realization that they need training, or they're told you need to do this training. We need a training program around this, and you're the best person for the job, but you're not a learning person. So you're like, man, I'm in charge of this big learning program, but I've never done a learning program before. That's another, why not? Why do that alone? Why do that by yourself? So I work with people who are in that position and just help them be successful. And it's, it ends up being fun. As I said earlier, it's fun. I love working with people that have an enthusiasm for learning, but have never done learning before. It's always a lot of fun.
That's great. So if you need a team member in learning strategy, Jerry Gschwind is your man. I think that's a great way to put it. It's just if you need help, in making yourselves better, then that's the time to at least explore the opportunity of bringing on a learning strategist.
Well, thank you so much, Jerry.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jerry. Appreciate it.
Such a wealth of knowledge.
Yes.
It's so great to talk to you as always, and we look forward to doing this again sometime. So we hope to have you back on Bring Out the Talent, and that's all for now.
Thank you so much, Jerry.
You're welcome. Can't wait to come back sometime.
Great.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
For more information on today's podcast guests and how they can help your organization, please visit www.thetrainingassociates.com.
Bring Out the Talent is a Mudhouse Media production.